Okay, folks, one more video on important factors that go with cities. And this is one that has been in the news in Nova Scotia quite a bit, but it's not one a lot of people know about. So the topic is it's environmental racism. So you know what the environment is, and I think you all know what racism is. So how does this then apply to cities and development and expansion? So environmental racism. First, we start with having a majority of some kind and a minority of some kind. One group outweighing the other. They could outweigh the other in terms of skin color, ethnicity, background, religion. There's something that the dominant group has and the minority, the non-dominant group, does not have. And they're not able to work together in a positive way. It's often the case. So what you will have is the community for the non-dominant group. It's often to the outskirts, it's to the edge of a city, or it is in an area that is not considered as desirable. And what happens is that community starts to receive pressure from the dominant group. So the dominant group, the dominant government, has all kinds of ways that they can pressure a community. If you've ever worked in retail and you suddenly start getting terrible shifts and things get changed at the last minute, it's basically a way to pressure you out. So a dominant group can pressure a minority community in really intense ways. So part of how that can work is you start with the services. So you make sure that things like telephone and power, maybe they're not available. Maybe they're interrupted all the time. Maybe they're not fixed regularly. You don't offer garbage removal. You just flat out, it's not going to be there. You don't have sewers that run to that community. So the waste disposal and using a toilet means you're using an outhouse instead, or it's not consistently available. You make sure that transportation is difficult, so a limit on public transportation. And you make sure that the potable water, the drinking water, is not consistently available or high quality. All of these things will place pressure on a minority community. And if that's not enough, and that's a lot, the dominant group can then do other things that will pressure that community in terrible ways. You could put a garbage dump right beside that community. You could put toxic material in that dump or beside it. Might leak into it. It might then damage their water supply. You could put a prison right beside that community. And while you're at it, maybe you could put a factory. Loud, noisy, lots of pollution, and polluting the water supply again. And maybe you'll put an infectious disease hospital. So not the kind of hospital people are like, yay, that's the hospital I want to have in my backyard. A hospital where people are scared of anything that's happening in that hospital. And if you really want to keep putting more pressure, you might put an abattoir. So an abattoir is a slaughterhouse. That's actually supposed to be a little pig and then bacon and a pork chop coming out. Abattoirs have lots of waste and violence ultimately associated with them. So if you want to pressure this community, you can put all those things around it. You can deny those services. Maybe you slap a railroad right through it so they never have any peace, and it could literally divide their community. And if not a railroad, you could put a superhighway right through that community. So when we look at environmental racism, it's these components that are happening around a community that are being put in place by the dominant group. The dominant group, if you were to talk to them, say, what's going on? The dominant group will be like, well, but we need those things. We need the factory. We need a garbage dump. Like, it has to go somewhere. They would say they need to do this for the good of everyone. This is for the benefit of everyone. Except that the only people who are really paying the high cost of the environmental damage and the stress of living next to it, it's the minority group. That's environmental racism. And then can go even further. The dominant group will then start blaming the minority group. Well, look at them. They don't have running water. They don't have a healthy environment. Look, they don't have proper toilets. So they start blaming the minority group. And what goes with blame is shame. So they start blaming and shaming the minority group for things that the majority group caused and supported. And at this point, this is where the minority group is like, well, wait a minute. What about all that stuff? That's the real issue. The majority group doesn't see it that way. They focus on blame and shame. Minority group, incredibly frustrated, rightly so. Majority group, it's like, what's your problem? You don't understand. It's just a few things. It's a few things that they don't deal with. Eventually, this leads to the majority group ignoring all of that and coming up with an idea to rescue the minority group from all of this stuff. And their big rescue plan is to take everything that's here and demolish it. Let's just get rid of that community completely. Let's have a fresh start. So it gets replaced with a new community. But it's a new community that's far out of the city. And the minority group is now no longer a part of the main city. They're removed to the farthest edges. And even out there, they may have some services that are better, but there will be other services like transportation. We know about the buses that only run once an hour that aren't going to be great. And this is where this group will keep saying, but what about these things? And the majority group is like, what are you talking about? Not totally sure what you're talking about. This is the root of structural racism. So when we look at environmental racism, when these factors all play together, and then over time, we're left with communities that have been under intense pressure. They've been dislocated, their communities have been destroyed, and the majority group is busy saying, no, this was all for the good of everybody. And the minority group is left pushed to the far edges of the community. That is environmental racism and how it contributes and supports structural racism. So we talked about environmental racism, a majority and a minority group, the kinds of pressures that can be put on a group, like factories, putting that in, and then denying other services. The idea that this is for the common good, but it's really the common good of the majority. The blame and shame game. Oh, look, they don't have electricity, they don't have running water. Never mind that it was denied from this group. And then we have the rescue solution. Oh, we can fix that by demolishing the community, which is what you've also learned is urban renewal, and how all of that then leads to structural racism. It's built into the system. There you go. Environmental racism, folks.